Well, now, earlier today, Beijing announced it had cut off all diplomatic contact with the Australian government under the China-Australia Strategic Economic Dialogue. This will block contact between key government officials below ministerial level, and it's the first major Chinese government response to the correct decision by the Morrison government to cancel Victoria's Belt and Road Agreement. The one plus is it may sharpen our focus on China. I mentioned earlier this week the professor from the University of Washington School of International Studies, Dr. Tabitha Mallory, arguing, quote, China's leaders see distant water fleets as a way to project presence around the world. The aim is to be present all over the world's oceans so they can direct the outcomes of international agreements that cover maritime resources, unquote. I mentioned that China's armada of fishing vessels, which I might add are depleting the world's oceans of marine life, but they've got the largest fishing fleet in the world, between 200 to 800,000 fishing boats, and they often serve as de facto paramilitary personnel. According to the Yale School of Environment, quote, under a civilian guise, this ostensibly private armada helps assert territorial domination, especially pushing back fishermen or governments that challenge China's sovereignty claims that encompass nearly all of the South China Sea, unquote. Now, I note that Nicholas Whitlam, the son of Gough, has basically said that China's behaviour in the South China Sea has nothing to do with us. I'm sorry, Nicholas, if we can't guarantee freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, the majority of our trade travel is under threat. Every man and his dog knows that in December 2013, the Chinese launched an all-out island-building campaign in the South China Sea. The islands have become military bases, such that a very large portion of the Pacific Ocean has been annexed by the Chinese Communist Party. It is high time we spoke up no matter the China threats. Our government seems to have forgotten that China, apart from the 99-year lease on the port of Darwin, which thankfully too late governments are waking up to, but have we forgotten China are now building an industrial city in Daru, in one of PNG's most impoverished provinces? And like the armada of fishing vessels, they're calling it a multifunction fishing industrial park. Multifunctional, all right. You can get in a little rubber boat from Daru to Australia in 3 days. And while there is focus on the port of Darwin, let's get serious about Daru, a $40 billion Chinese city, hardly a whimper from Canberra. Can someone give the government a geography lesson? A former CIA operations officer, Charles Faddis, has said, and I quote, there's no rational reason for the investment of this much money by the Chinese in this location. From a business perspective, they're going to build wharves, warehouses and support facilities. In short, what they're going to build is a naval base, unquote. Says Faddis, a former CIA operations officer, it'd be accurate to look at China's vast fleet of fishing vessels as a militia rather than a commercial enterprise. Their mission is to expand China's sphere of influence. He says Chinese fishing vessels are armed and their crews trained by the People's Liberation Army Navy, unquote. Ominously, writes Faddis about this so-called industrial city in Papua New Guinea, Chinese Communist Party's $40 billion spend, 3 days in a rubber boat from Australia. Well, writes Faddis, eventually the inevitable will occur. Chinese naval vessels, ostensibly deployed to protect their fishermen, in the end will begin to call. Facilities will be expanded, heavy weapons will appear, the facade that Daru is a purely commercial facility will be abandoned. Let me say bluntly, if the Chinese build a base on Daru, that base will be able to control all maritime traffic through the Torres Strait. We import 80% of our oil, most of it comes from refineries in Singapore. So that any of that oil moving to ports on the east coast of Australia, like Brisbane and Sydney, has to transit the Torres Strait. And just as the Chinese can threaten the movement of ships from Taiwan, Korea and Japan, which they've done by their bases in the South China Sea, they'll now be able to hold a dagger to our throat. What the Chinese are doing in Daru and Darwin is what they've already done in the South China Sea and in Tibet and in numerous other places. They are annexing territory. They are expanding. China must know we're fair dinkum. The former Foreign Minister Gareth Evans should know better. While Mr Whitlam says these things are, quote, not Chinese aggression, they're internal matters, unquote, Gareth Evans reminds us to be, quote, careful about our language when talking about China. So in other words, Gareth, you're just saying we should shut up. Well, at least Gareth Evans had one thing right. The former Foreign Minister said China wants to be, quote, far more of a rule maker than a rule taker. Well, you did right, Gareth. China want the world to play by their rules, and they're coming after us to make sure that that happens. How long does government remain silent about the sell-off of Australia to China and its naked expansionism in our region? Darwin and Daru would be a good start, but on both, our national government has little to say.